community. We also feel that we're going to be impacted by SHARs or federal revenues that we budget in the last that we get paid for from this year's services to next year, and so we think that's going to be a significant impact because we're not able to deliver the services and therefore will not be reimbursed. For 2021, we anticipate that state revenues may not be impacted if the state does not reduce the funding level. This is the second year of our biennium, and so we feel that if the state does not reduce the funding level and instead utilizes other state revenues such as the rainy day fund, other federal revenues that become available as part of the stimulus to cover those revenue losses, we feel that we would not be negatively impacted. For 21-22, we feel that the district, we're already planning for a reduction in state revenues based on the drop in sales tax, oil prices dropping, and other impacts due to COVID. We are bracing ourselves, and we've gotten information that we should be looking at trying to reserve additional funding and not have expenses that would not be in the normal course because of that anticipated fall in revenues in the new biennium for the fiscal year 21-22. And just so that's in a nutshell what we're looking at. Again, I think for the Central Appraisal District, we've always felt that there should be an alignment or recognition of what sponsoring entities are providing in compensation. And we, particularly now, given the current environment and some of the sponsoring entities are facing, that would be something that would be should be considered. I also think that it's one of the things that we got, and I know I reached out through emails from Ms. Kilgore and I've spoken to Mr. David Stone, but I think one of the issues was to there was a decision by Ms. Kilgore to not appraise any residential properties, and that may significantly impact EPIC if the CAD is not within an acceptable range of the property value study, and the state utilizes that property value study to set our taxable value, and therefore the district would receive less state funding. So just an issue that we're tracking. Certainly that's her purview, but again, a concern from our aspect as we look to potentially reduction of state revenues and all the other issues involved. That's in a nutshell. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Any questions from the board? Okay, if there are no questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Aditya. We appreciate your commentary.
Of course, thank you.
Mr. Robert Cortinas?
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. My name is Robert Cortinas. I'm CFO for the City of El Paso. So just a little bit of a recap from our end. So I did a presentation to the City Council back on April 13th, highlighting, again, very preliminary estimates based on what we're looking at as far as the impact. Right now, we're estimating about a $26.4 million impact for this fiscal year alone. Similar to the EPISD situation, we have collected most of our property taxes, so that's not going to be an issue in this fiscal year. But we are looking at more than likely severe impacts into our sales tax collections for the rest of the fiscal year. We really won't know that impact until the middle of May when we see those March sales tax collections posted from the state. So other than sales tax, really looking at the bridge revenue, that's going to be an area also with the declining passenger traffic that we're seeing on the international bridges. Just depending upon how long that continues, we're seeing major reductions in that area as well. So what we're doing to get by this fiscal year in order to balance out the budget, we've already implemented a hiring freeze. We have also identified about $18 million of reductions throughout all the city departments, which includes, as I mentioned, the hiring freeze for all non-essential. We thankfully had some money set aside in our residential street maintenance program, our annual pay-go money, about $6.6 million that we're setting aside for now, just in case we need that at the end of the fiscal year. And then we've identified also some additional pay reductions, temporary pay reductions for our city employees for a 12-week period. And so that's just to balance out this $26 million we're facing this year, $26 million deficit. We are going to have a discussion on this coming Monday, a little bit of a look ahead as to what we're going to see for next year. We're expecting that number to at least double. One of the things that Carmen mentioned about the decision not to do any reappraisals on residential obviously is going to have an impact potentially on the amount of property tax revenue we see come in from the residential side as far as any growth or increased values. Looking at our sales tax, we're trying to be cautiously optimistic, but at the same time trying to be reasonable and putting together these projections. Again, nobody really knows how long the situation is going to last, but we're developing the budget in worst case scenario and expecting it to last through third quarter of next year. Employee pay raises for next year. We're going through right now identifying additional adjustments that we can do in order to balance out the budget for next year. And as I mentioned, we're going to give council sort of a look ahead of what we're looking at for next year. And as I mentioned, that number is going to be pretty significant as far as these adjustments. We've had some discussions on top of the pay reductions of looking at furloughs with all the city facilities that are currently closed. We have a lot of employees essentially sitting at home right now that are unable to work. We've provided employees who are able to telecommute the technology that they need in order to do their job, but we do have a lot of city services that are provided, face-to-face at those different facilities, whether it be rec centers, senior centers, the pools, all the different quality-of-life type amenities that we provide to the community. Unfortunately, right now with this current health crisis, we weren't able to do that at this time. And as I mentioned, really no estimated time frame as to when we make it back to reopening those facilities. So with that, I mean, that pretty much sums up where we stand. Obviously, it's, a lot of uncertainty. It's, a lot of trying to be proactive and making sure we're making financially sound decisions now so that we can put ourselves in the best position possible to address the challenge. I think one of the final things I'll point out is, there's a lot of people that are pointing to the federal government money that's out there and available to the city and the county. And I'm sure Wally may talk a little bit about this as well. But right now, a lot of the money that's coming to the cities is going to be right now restricted for very limited purposes. So even though it's a large amount of money, there's only certain expenses that we're going to be able to use those funds for unless the federal government decides to provide some flexibility as to how those funds can be used. So although we were able to receive a large sum of money from the federal government today, it's going to be, as I mentioned, very difficult to actually use those funds unless they provide some flexibility in how those funds can be used. So that concludes my...
Mr. Cortina, this is Mr. Mena. I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Did City of El Paso lay off some workers? For example, you mentioned something about the parks. Have they collected unemployment?
As of right now, we haven't. Although we did have some part-time temporary type positions that we had hired or were in the process of hiring for the 4 water parks that were scheduled to open this summer.
Right.
Since those facilities won't be opening this summer, there was no need, obviously, to have those part-time or temporary positions get started. So as far as layoffs, those really weren't layoffs. It was just really, they never really got started with the city. But up until this point, there has been no layoffs related to what we're facing.
So you're protecting most of the city jobs then?
We're doing everything we can to try to minimize the impact on our employees. So, I mean, one of the other things we did early on in early March was before the Family First Coronavirus Response Act came out that gave the 80 hours of emergency leave. We actually gave our city employees access to additional administrative leave for those who were at home, unable to telecommute. We gave them, some additional hours in order to try to, if they didn't have leave balances, to, provide them some relief so that they weren't impacted.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, any other questions from other members of the board? Okay, Mr. Cortinas, thank you for your commentary. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Perez.
Mr. Hargrove.
Good evening. My name is Wally Hargrove. I am the Executive Director of the Budget Department for the County of El Paso. Not to sound like a broken record, but I probably will. El Paso County is experiencing some rather significant impacts as a result of COVID-19, and not only on the expenditure side, but also on the impacts to our estimated revenues. As of right now, we're expecting about a $17 million hit from this unfortunate pandemic. And revenues tend to drop off and drop like an elevator and slowly climb out of a recession like you're on an escalator. So we're anticipating this to last probably around 2 years to be able to do a full recovery. We conducted a meeting today with Commissioners Court, and I gave them a similar budget overview that Mr. Cortinas mentioned he gave to the City Council last week, whereby the county heard some of their budget options on possible actions for them to consider taking. Today, they took about $8 million worth of actions to help manage this revenue loss. And I have just finished drafting an email that will be going out to county departments in the morning that is instructing every county department to reduce 3% out of their current fiscal year 2020 budget off of their remaining balances. So departments will have the next 2 weeks to present their proposals and recommendations for budget reductions to our expenditures today. Our, of course, single largest revenue source, similar to the other entities, are property taxes. We do also have a concern over the fact that we're not going to have a reappraisal on residential property, and are even more concerned with the fact that with the COVID impact on the shelter in place and the closing of a lot of our retail establishments that are revenue producing, that the number of challenges that will be made of appraisals that will more likely impact us for the fiscal year 21 budget will probably be rather significant. So to the extent that the ARB looks at these contested values, we think we're going to have a more significant impact in fiscal year 2021. As with the school district and the city, of course, our property taxes are in the high 90 percentile on collections, and so we don't have a concern for fiscal year 2020. However, sales tax is our second largest revenue source, and our sales tax over this span of time is estimated to take about a $6.7 million hit, which is a little less than 20% of our sales taxes. And that model was built under the assumption that the shelter in home gets lifted sometime near the end of May, and we start resuming business during the month of June. So every month that this shelter in place goes beyond May, and we don't get back to a normal revenue stream, although there's a lot of uncertainty what the new normal is going to be, I don't feel comfortable that people are going to fill up bars and restaurants and retail establishments right away until such time that there is an effective means in place to combat the COVID-19 pandemic. So I think it will take a couple of years to pull out of this financial drop. Additionally, we are estimating significant reductions in the areas of our mixed beverage tax from retailers and restaurants. We've already seen a hit from our second quarter on that. The last 2 weeks of March have dropped off by 43% on mixed beverage taxes. Since the shelter-in-place order, our courts are somewhat dormant, are only taking care of emergency cases. So a majority of our misdemeanor cases and our cases through the JP courts and civil papers and evictions are all on hold right now. And collectively, all of those fines, court costs, and fees that come in as a result of that normal activity are going to be down somewhere to the tune of about $7 million. So as we assess what the next 6 to 10 weeks holds for us, we're going to be doing our revenue estimates on a very routine cycle to see if the budgetary recommendations we provided the court need to be scaled up. At this point in time, we have instructed all departments to reduce their operating budgets for fiscal year 2021 by no less than 5%. And we are going to wait to see what the next potential federal package hold for each of the governmental entities, and that date is supposed to be around May 15th. So if we don't get some supplemental funding and the ability to replace some of our revenue sources, we may need to resort to some deeper recommended budget cuts going into FY 2021. So to the extent that the board is about to deliberate and discuss and take action on the appraisal district, your final action, of course, is important to every taxing entity in this community, as from a contractual or legal basis, you're in our top 10 vendor list. And that is, I think you all are the fourth largest vendor that we pay on an annual basis. So there is a significance to any action that you take at the budgetary level with the appraisal district, the impact of our future year budgets. So your thoughtful consideration is truly appreciated, not only on behalf of El Paso County, but every taxing entity within our community. I'll close with the last item, and that is, I don't think there's any possibility that we're going to consider any staffing augmentation next year to be able to balance that budget. So we probably will not have any merit steps program funded for fiscal year 2021 or any cost of living increases either. I don't believe we'll have the fiscal ability to do so. That being said, I'm open and available for any questions you may have.
Any questions from members of the board? Okay, Mr. Hargrove, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you all, board members, for the work you do for this community. We truly appreciate it. And Mr. Pettis, I'm going to drop off this call because I have to go on to the Emergency Service District budget meeting in a few minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night. Okay, Ms. Kilgore. Ms. Kilgore, do you want to begin?
Well, I kind of want to get an idea of what the board feels. I will address, we've got some preliminary numbers. We'll be sending out the preliminary tax roll the 30th, the end of next week. But we've run some preliminary numbers, not knowing what the ARB is going to do. For an example, El Paso County is seeing an increase of about 9.8% in value at this time. So yes, we did reappraise the El Paso ISD. It's about a 12% increase. If you look at the city of El Paso, it's about a 10% increase in value over last year's value. So I want to make sure the board understands we did reappraise properties. We just did not send out 350,000 plus notices. We only reappraised all the commercial properties, the business personal property, and then residential properties that showed a large increase, or new improvements, new construction, additions, the difference between market and the cap for the assessed values. So it wasn't that we did not look at at everything as a whole. We just were trying to eliminate having 30,000 protests and having a large amount of people in a building when we can't do social distancing. So those numbers are preliminary. That of course the entities will get their real preliminary roll the end of next week. We don't know what's going to happen with the summer, with the hearings. We do know commercial property agents have already said they're filing a protest on everything, and they're going to handle it mostly by electronic format because they're going to leave themselves available for lawsuits. I have spoken with the chairman of the Appraisal Review Board and asked him to be sure he gets with their attorney on directions regarding the January 1 assessment date. We are assessing as of January 1. We have visited with the governor and with the comptroller's office, and that is the date that we're assessing by. And we know there's a lot of people that are going to protest wanting an adjustment due to COVID. That's going to be in the 2021 numbers if it shows up at all. So we know that we are going to have the protests like we always do with commercial properties. We know that they're probably going to file lawsuits. We'll have to deal with that. But talking to the chairman, asking him to talk to his attorney to get directions that they can give the ARB members, the ARB attorney and the chairman, regarding the property tax code in the January 1 date. We'll see how things play out. We'll know more once the hearings will start June 15th. We will send out notices starting next week. We will not be doing face-to-face informal at this time. They can come into the building. We're looking at opening the building on the 18th of May, and they'll be limited. We'll be distancing. They can file a protest, and then our appraisers are connected through internet. They will be giving them a call and seeing what we can settle over the phone or emails, that type of thing. So I just kind of wanted to, Commissioner Pettis, just kind of give all the board members that update of what you and I talked about.
Okay, thank
Does
you.
anybody have any questions to me regarding that part of it? And then if you want, Vince, I can kind of get into the budget that we handed out in March.
Okay. And any questions from the board? And can all board members hear okay?
Yes.
Or,
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Hey, it's Chuck Taylor. Can you hear me?
yes, sir.
Yes.
Listen, I'm concerned about pessimism and optimism. We're getting a lot of cautious optimism on what we need to do to stay afloat. But we're not getting any information. Maybe they have never done it before, on who's responsible for giving us the progress line for conquering this medical problem that we have. I seem not to be hearing how we are tackling that entity of the total problem. We're optimistic in certain areas about we can survive, but then when we label stuff with a 2-year survival rate, I don't see too much optimism that can last. And we got to get on something else to keep our spirits up as far as conquering COVID-19. I hope I'm thinking on the right track. And everyone has that similar task in mind on what we need to do from the medical side to solve the guessing game. Thanks.
I mean, sure, Dinah.
Okay. One thing, we have looked at the budget. The original budget we sent you, the original draft, was in March, where that was all worked on with the committee in February. So of course, things have changed. That was a 5% increase in the budget. So things have changed. I do want the board to know that the staff has been looking where we can cut, how we can do without. An example would be the strategic plan and replacing the vehicles. We can hold off on replace. We have 7 vehicles left to be replaced. We can hold off on that. There are areas that we can work with the budget to get it down. I just kind of want direction as to what the board thinks. I want to remind the board, I think it's really great, Commissioner Pettis, that you brought on folks to visit with the board, from the county, the city, and EPISD. But let me remind the board, we are what they call a zero-based budget. We do not have investments that we can sell or turn in to generate revenue. We do not have rainy day funds or certificates of deposit that are on hold for emergencies or large construction projects that they may be able to cancel. We have a zero budget. So what we start off with is zero. We have no monies anywhere to be able to utilize. So I just wanted to remind the board that we are different in any other entity, municipality or school district or county that is allowed to have different investments, different certificates of deposit, different savings accounts. We're not allowed to have any of that. The end of the year, all of our funds have to go back. So we start with zero. So I don't have any savings to pick up anything if we end up going over budget. So yes, we do put in a few things in there, but again, we have looked at some things that we can kind of like Mr. Hargrove said, looking at different vendors. We have looked at different projects or purchases like a flyby. We can wait a year to do another flight. We can wait to buy the vehicles. There are some things that we can look at. I just kind of want to get a direction from all the board members as to what they would like to see. Commissioner Pettis, if that would be all right.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I've got a comment and a question, please.
Mr. Earls.
Yes. Ms. Kilgore, could you, for the new board members particularly, elaborate on a little bit more on what you said, budget and the funds go back?
Ma'am, at the end of our fiscal year, we have an audit. They come in and do an audit. Whatever funds we do not spend, and we're very conscientious, we're very thrifty on the funds, whatever is not spent that was budgeted goes back to all of the entities based on the percentage they paid in. This last year, we had about $1 million that we did not spend. So that was divided amongst the entities as a credit towards their first payment. But that we're not allowed to keep that. That has to go back. That's why we have what we call a zero balance when we first start off. We don't have any income in our budget that says we have these savings accounts, we have this income. We have zero income at the time.
Thank you.
Is that the what you wanted me to answer? Was that the answer?
Well, yeah, mainly the funds go back. That anything that is not spent, and that historically at the end of every year, we do. Every single entity receives something in relation to what they put in back. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Pettis, I have a question. This is Mr. Mena.
Mr. Mena. Yes, sir.
So with that said, so why should we hold off on purchasing the vehicles? Maybe we should go ahead and buy the vehicles then.
I agree.
You understand what I'm saying? So if why hold back if we're going to have to give the money back on anything? That's the way I look at it.
This is Walter Miller. I would like to comment.
Okay. I'm sorry.
This is Walter Miller.
Go ahead, Walter.
I would like to comment here. We're giving back money that we have taken out of budgets that are already tight. The amount that we have reserved for this vendor may be somebody's job in their in our home government or our home bodies. So yeah, we may get it back at the end, but we have to budget for that up front. And if we know it's coming, then that may be somebody's job. So I think it's incumbent on this whole body to understand that everybody is in a tight place. We are cutting to the bone. There are things that we are not doing in our home governments. And I think we should have a little bit of that kind of attitude with whatever budget we have. We are in really extreme tough times. And yeah, you may give us some money back, but that's money we didn't get to use for a year.
And I'm kind of on board with Mr. Miller in the sense that if we can do anything, at least for this upcoming budget cycle this year, if we can do anything to, I know it will be minimal in the grand scheme of, the millions of dollars that both the city and the county especially are going to be facing as a deficit. But if we can do anything, even a minimal part to show that, we are trying to assist our community, then I think it's important.
Right, and to go along with what Mr. Taylor had asked about, this is an unprecedented situation. It's like nothing that our country has seen before. Certainly something that none of us in our lifetimes have had to deal with. From a governmental and budgeting perspective, the drop off was so rapid, and we're still trying to figure out the implications, to our budgets. Again, these are snapshots in time. So to Mr. Taylor's question, regarding the medical aspect of this, well, hopefully folks adhere to the orders and the curve starts to flatten and we can get some semblance back to normal. Will it immediately start off where things were? No, I don't think they will. But the purpose of, I think providing that overview is that for at least for municipalities, I think it's a little bit more stable, on the school district side because of the biennium budget, as Ms. Arieta articulated. These are it's only in emergency circumstances where entities such as county, hospital district, or any municipality has to reopen up their budget and cut because of there's so much uncertainty that lies ahead, and so there's been 25 or 26 million people across the country who's lost their job within the last 4 months. Here in El Paso County, that number I think is about 35,000 people who have lost their jobs in the last 4 months. It's inevitably going to have implications on the budgets. It's just the municipalities and the county and the hospital district, I think, are going to see it first before it trickles down to the school district.
So with that said, why are the city and the county so opposed to not having the appraisal? How are people going to pay more taxes? They don't have jobs and don't have money. They certainly can't pay any more taxes.
I think I don't know the specific reasoning. I know that there were some smaller school districts. I think that were upset. Ms. Kilgore, you could probably speak to that. But as Ms. Kilgore said, I mean, properties that did show an increase, were appraised, and then there were commercial properties were also appraised.
Exactly.
But also keep in mind this is the very preliminary appraisal, way before any protests. So you can expect, given the commercial devastation, again, that was so rapid. And I don't know if Ms. Kilgore has any stats.
No, we did appraise commercial. We need to clear that it sounded like the city and the county were quite upset about us not appraising residential. What good would it do to raise people's taxes when they can't pay them if they don't have jobs?
No, I hear you. I think there's also a concern. As Mr. Hargrove had indicated, retail has been closed for over 4 weeks now. There's certainly going to probably be I would expect.
Is anyone still there? Did I lose them?
I'm here.
Vince,
I'm here.
We lost him.
We lost Vince.
We lost Vince.
I'm sorry.
Let me text him.
No. I don't know why this thing keeps booting me off. But
He's back.
But I would expect that. Don't think that the school districts are going to be immune from this. I think that the level of protests that we're going to see is probably going to be unprecedented. Because again, the economic situation that we're seeing is unprecedented. So the initial appraisal roll that's being presented is before any of the protest process even begins. Obviously staff would have more expertise on what are the kinds of things that can be challenged on the commercial side. But we're looking at properties and we have folks on the board who are real estate experts and other things that can talk perhaps more about, the market and what they foresee. But it's just the general point is, this is an unprecedented economic event. No one's going to be spared from this. The Central Appraisal District is unique because, again, their budget is set ahead of time. It's not something that's reopened, when there's a situation. So I think the whole purpose of that was just so the board has that perspective, has that context, to plan appropriately.
Mr. Mena, what kind of raises are y'all looking at in Socorro?
I don't know yet. We're still in discussion over that. That hasn't been brought up. Everything's up in the air still.
Catherine, anything at?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So, yeah, so what we did with this, and we haven't approved the budget, we just had a preliminary discussion, but we've increased our health percent contribution for our employees 3%. So we're looking at, I guess, a raise of 2%. So
And
kind
we're
of
doing
offsets
the
that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what we're planning to do.
That's exactly what we're doing as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Of course.
And as it pertains to COVID-19, I think the CARES Act, the federal CARES Act, required all insurers, whether you're self-insured or whether you're insured through a third party, to absorb all costs associated with COVID diagnostic testing. I don't know the exact specifics, but I do know that was included in the CARES Act. So there can't be deductibles, co-pays, or anything like that, obviously, to encourage folks to get the appropriate diagnostic testing that's necessary. And so as a self-insured plan with the county, that's something that we had to absorb, but it was kind of a federal mandate.
Right, and Vince, if I may, that's something that you brought up, federal mandates. There are some things that have to be covered in this budget that were mandated by legislation last year, and that's extra mailings that we have to do, the website that has to be maintained. You know, there are some things in there that we are having to cover, a separate website for the entities to be able to put in their tax information and their tax rate hearing information. So in saying that, it may be that we may come to the board. Here is an option for the board, is we can do what the board wants to be very conservative, but we may come to the board in September and may have to encumber whatever is going to be turned over to pay for something that we did not know of.
So,
Hear me?
I have Mr. Chair, may I ask a question,
Yes, ma'am.
please?
Go ahead.
What
Yes,
we're
ma'am.
seeing essentially is a 5% increase in the budget, correct? As been presented. Is it possible? I know in years gone by, you know, there's always somewhere to shave off something. Could the board look at possibly just asking for, 1% shaved off the top of that? Because I think you are going to have unforeseen things that you are going to need money. We are going to need money for that. There's no other way to get that money in mid-year, essentially. Is there any way that you could provide the board with maybe a budget with some, maybe an option A, B, give a cut here or cut there somewhere?
Oh, definitely. Yes,
Well, this is Sam Trimble. Yeah, I think and we ended up doing that last year and just picking a percentage and saying, hey, can we look at something along these lines? And it worked out well. But, I think you guys have done such a great job. And like you said, I mean, last year, fiscal year, it was almost $1 million, right, that was returned.
Yes.
So to know that we had that available last year because of the job that you all did, to then increase again this year, I think now is the time, if any, to really, and maybe it's not even incumbent upon you all for us to ask, hey, can you knock 1% off or 2% or something, but to really go through this and see the things that when everyone else is considering, furloughs or worse, then now is the time to really be able to kind of buckle down and look individually at things that maybe need to wait. When it comes to increases for, I was looking at something earlier at 1610 fixed assets and the new Surface Pluses. What are we using right now? Are they working? Do they suffice for, do they have a lifetime of another few months and things like that, rather than trying to just tell you all, hey, give us 1%. You've done well enough in the past. If we had $1 million left last time around and then the increase is 5% or AKA 900,000 this time, I mean, that's a pretty big swing.
In response to that, yes, there are some things that we looked at. If you looked under the asset listing, there are the Surface Pros, about $8,400 that we can remove from the budget right there. we had to go in and get a lease right away to allow for employees to work from home. So we're now covered under a lease on that, so we don't have to purchase those Surface Pros. We're also looking at not flying next year, waiting to the following year to renew our contract with Eagle View. That's $280,000 savings that we can do
that's
there.
huge.
We're looking at, okay, so if we don't buy 5 cars this year, maybe we buy 3, or maybe we buy none and we buy the last of the 7 next year. We break it down a little bit more. So there are things that we have looked at that will bring down that increase of a 5% increase to anywhere from, maybe a 2 or even a 3. We can.
And to me, that's there's a lot of little available things like that, and as long as these are things that are not hindering the productivity, and ability of your team, I think there's some ways to get this trimmed down a little bit.
Right, and we can. My suggestion was going to be, I wanted all the board members to let me know, how they feel, but we can take everything that we're hearing in this workshop, which we normally do, and then we'll work some numbers. And my recommendation would be that in 2 weeks we have a committee meeting with the budget committee again, go over the numbers with them, and if they're comfortable with them, then we send them out to the rest of the board members to review, so that you can call us back with anything, call the committee back, or we can finalize it in May when we approve the budget. Because we will have to post about 10 days before the May board meeting a budget. That doesn't mean it can't be changed, but we have to post. So that would be my recommendation. Keep listening to what y'all have to say, but take all of this in any direction you give us and work the numbers, and then present them to you guys in 2 weeks after we have a meeting with the budget committee. What do y'all think about that?
That sounds good to me.
Good to me.
Chairman
Yes.
Ferris, this is
Yes,
Walter
sir.
Miller.
Mr. Miller.
Yes, and I agree that I think that's a great idea, but I think all things should be on the table also. As Mr. Hargrove said, they're already forecasting 0 employee increases. And it's not this year that we're so much worried about. It's the following year where our revenues are just going to be hurt so much. So I think we need to look at, you got an 8% increase in your employee. Well, it's actually closer to 10% or over 10% when you add in benefits. And I think you need to look at that really hard too. I know everybody needs a cost of living and everybody needs to go forward, but some folks aren't going to get it this year. And a lot of the taxpayers aren't going to get it this year. And one of the optics of that is if the taxing entity is or what they perceive as a taxing entity is not following what the rest of the community is. So when you go back to look at it, please go back and look at your employee costs also, because that's what moves the line the most. It always is. Your biggest cost is your employees, and the changes there move the mark the furthest. So that's my recommendation there. Thank you.
Of course, and Mr. Miller, we have been looking at that to see where we could make some adjustments. There are some things that have to go in there, but there's some things that we could definitely pull out. So we'll come up with a couple of different scenarios that will give you guys options to pick from.
But in that, this year's budget does have a 2% market, 2% competency built into it as it currently stands, correct?
Yes, sir. We were already looking at changes in that.
I mean, and a
Ms. Kilgore,
2%
do
market
be
is
mindful
reasonable.
that you have,
For this
as best as I know, you have 2, and probably the others will follow suit. School districts that are going to give raises, and we are going to increase stipends as well.
Yeah.
Do y'all, Mr. Pettis, Commissioner Pettis, is there anyone else that would like to give us any direction or any comments? What I'm catching up, if I may do just kind of a synopsis, what I'm hearing from everybody is where can we shave off some numbers in the operating expense or purchases that maybe we can put off, look at the competency or market increases and see what changes we can do there, and see where we can come up with a budget that we are proud to say we're taking the entities in the community and in mind when we're making these changes. Am I kind of getting?
Dana, I have a question, Mr. Mena.
Yes, sir.
Do you think that we're going to have a lot of lawsuits due to the fact that some of these companies are not going to be able to pay,
Yeah.
they're going to dispute? Maybe we should put some money away for that. It's an
I
unforeseen
agree.
expense.
We do feel we've already had a couple of tax agents that have told us they're going to be filing protests on all of their accounts that they have. They'll be doing them by affidavit because then they'll be looking at which ones to actually file lawsuits on. We normally have, Albert, about 250, 275 a year file. We're anticipating that to be a lot higher. Again, it's a snapshot. We're not sure how it'll play out, but just in listening to some of the larger tax agents, we do know some of the state firms that have businesses here in El Paso and throughout the state of Texas. They've already gotten an AG opinion. They're going to try and come in on a disaster relief exemption. The AG has already told them that it does not qualify. It does not meet because it's for property damage. But we anticipate that somebody somewhere is going to challenge that in court. If one does it, everybody will.
Yeah, because I think we need to be prepared for that because that's money, that's revenue. That's revenue that we can give back to our taxing entities.
And possibly on that same line, Mr. Mena, I'm thinking that maybe what they shave off the budget could be put into that fund.
I was going to go there, but you said it.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds reasonable.
Yeah, because we need to be prepared for next year. I mean, this is revenue that we're collecting for our taxing entities. And
exactly.
If they're gonna, we
it's
need
an
to be
umbrella.
for that. Exactly. So it's the ripple effect for the next 2 years. This year we're somewhat okay, but the next 2 years,
it's
gonna be horrible. Guarantee you.
I would totally agree.
This is Sam Trimble. I was looking under 5072, and I didn't know is that where the active shooter alert system would go, or is that 65,000 under PC automated, but it's listed as HVAC? I'm just curious because that was something that right off the bat, when I'm looking through and the 108,000 for police protection and going into this, the more research I did following that meeting, the more I recognized that city, county, state, there's not very many buildings that have protection. And although I definitely want to make the building as secure as possible and safe as possible, that may be one of those things that as long as we're maintaining the police presence and having that expenditure for an on-site police personnel, that might be one of those things that we put off a year because of the size of that expense.
I'm not sure if we can. I think we've already signed it. The contract was already signed.
Yeah, that was my second question.
Yeah. We can definitely look into it, though, Mr. Trimble, but I believe that's already a done deal.
Okay.
We've got it. It's 108,000. Is that the one you were looking at?
The police protection or the active shooter system?
The active shooter.
Oh, okay. What line is that?
Hold on. What's the word?
Page 8?
Okay, hold on. Let me see what page. Okay, the police is 108. I'm not sure. Where do we have the? Where do we have the? Where did we?
Under 5072. The only thing I see that might be it is that PC automated, but it's listed as HVAC. I don't know. It's 65,000, which is similar.
That's our HVAC. That's the we have the chillers that they have to come in and service. So that's what that is.
I saw Stanley, who's a servicer. Anyway, if it's already been done, it's already been done. But that was just a thought that crossed my mind because that was something that we just
Yeah, it would be under Stanley on page 12. Page 5, I'm sorry. Yeah, under Stanley on page 5. Under which one? Stanley security, standing building security access, and then Stanley outside security and maintenance. So we can add all those up under 5072.
So that is it. Okay.
Yeah, the cameras. Yeah, we had, this is also including outside security. We had shootings in our parking lot. So this is for outside monitoring.
Okay.
We have a place next door that rents out on the weekends and in the evenings for parties, and they were using our parking lot as a shooting gallery. Nice neighbors. We got rid of the new.
I think you reflected the sentiment of everything that I've heard. This is Trimble again, as far as, you know, it really is just kind of an unprecedented time to be able to look at every item, you know, and I literally sit down and look at every single item that's increasing and see if there's something that could be done item by item. And I know that's what you're doing as well.
Yes. We're trying to determine sometimes a smaller item by making a small change in an item. It's such a minuscule, it doesn't make it an impact. So we're trying to look at things that really do make an impact. That's why we were looking at the 280 for the flight next year. We can postpone on that one. That's why we were looking at the vehicles in the strategic plan. That's 150,000, you know, that we can postpone for another year. My worry is, board members, because this has happened before. I don't think y'all were on the board, but about 10 years ago or so, we saw that the economy was going down really bad. And so we, because our budget is first, we decided to say, okay, guys, we're not going to do, at that time they were called COLAs, you know, no COLAs, no merit increases, no increases in staff. We went down to very minimal amount of staff. It was very difficult. And then everybody else kept doing their own thing. And it took us several years to get back where we needed to be. So I worry about putting off, I don't mind a year. I think we should. I think everybody should be conscientious of what's happening right now because everyone's going to be hurting, all the way from the taxpayer to the businesses to the entities. But I just worry about, okay, next year, our 2021-2022 budget, how's it going to affect us, and then going into the next. So that's kind of something that we're looking at. How does it, I think Wally said this, kind of say the same thing. This year may not be so bad, but then the budget that they go into 2 years from now be a big hit. So I just want to be cautious that we don't go so far down that we can't get back up again.
And that's why, again, you know, I think the idea of things that are directly correlated to productivity and day-to-day business are the things less likely to needed to be looked at versus the things that are upcoming expenditures that we haven't had this past year and the year before.
Yes, sir. Mr. Trimble, that's one of the things we started looking at because that's the easiest thing to do without.
Any other questions from board members?
Mr. Chair, did you like the idea of having a committee that Ms. Kilgore gave?
Yeah, I think, well, she's referring to the budget committee, if I'm right, Ms. Kilgore, if that was
yes, sir.
The budget subcommittee. But I think that, you know, the board, you know, should give some general parameters, you know, for Ms. Kilgore. Well, it's up. I'm actually willing. I'll leave it up to the discretion of the board, but you know, it's always helpful to at least give some direction regarding the budget. Like, you know, so for example, if the litigation reserve is something it is that we still feel strongly about, that needs to be you know, as much as possible, be anticipating that there's going to be an increase in lawsuits or whatever the case is. I think that there should be parameters, you know, regarding the personnel line. You know, is that something it is that is off limits, or can there be reductions to that? I mean, I think there should be parameters.
I would just ask to see like maybe two options, 3 options, not just one, that you know, if we did this, it'd be that. If we did this, it'd be the other thing. You know, here's a 2% reduction, a 1% reduction, and it would affect whatever. You know, that we would just have a few options that we could look at.
That's perfect. I would go for that.
Pardon my naivete, but who is the budget subcommittee?
It's myself, Freddie Avalos, and Walter Miller.
Chairman Pettis, this is Walter Miller.
Yes, sir.
Generally, the way I look at these budgets are, as I mentioned before, the big ticket item for such employees. So that even a little movement in that makes a big difference. The other way I look at them is those items in the budget, those line items in the budget that have the largest percentage increase year to year, and you have to wonder what's new, what happens there. Sometimes they're explainable. Sometimes they are not. The particular one that is obvious to me, and this one is the education part of it. It's explained as training, additional training that we're going to need. Let's make sure that we have to have that. It's another $40,000 on the budget over last year that we did the training last year for a set amount. There may be extenuating circumstances. Fine, let's look at that and make sure that we have to spend the money that we do. But generally, when I review budgets like this, I look for those large jumps, those big jumps like that, and wonder what precipitated that change. So that's what I will be looking at when the new budgets come back. So,
Chairman, this is Ms. Luceto. I think that as we review the budget and as the budget committee goes in and does some relooks at it again as well and presents options and things of that nature, I understand we face this at the school district that, you know, we have an entire county and city who are going through crisis. The city is having to furlough folks and stuff like that. But at the same time, I also believe it's important, if we have the ability, if we can at least provide our employees a cost of living raise. I think it's important. They're also raising families. They're going through struggles as well. And I want them to know that we care about them and we want to take care of them through the crisis. So if there's a possibility to make sure that they get a small increase, whether it be cost of living, I just want to emphasize that that's important.
I echo that as well. So, Ms.
So do I.
Please give us, options that reflect that as well.
Chairman Pettis, this is Ronnie Lowenfield.
Mr. Lowenfield.
And just from an optics perspective on personnel, so I think one way to compare it is to the school districts. What are they doing? What's the city doing? What's the county doing? I think that's a fair. It sounds like a reasonable way. Also, just coming from the private business world, we've been able to be open, although it's different, and we've had to lay off 100 people. And our current employees, we've had to cut pay significantly. And yes, it's been terrible, but it is our reality. So while in theory I would love to give everybody a raise, it's just unprecedented times. And so I think from an optics perspective, we could get by with some sort of raise that matched the other school districts or the city or the county's proposals. But from just private business, raises are not even being, it's like just having a job is quite a blessing at this time. So just something to think on. The other thing that we have been real successful in is vendor concessions because of this unprecedented event. I don't know if there are any or that if you've reached out to any, but so for example, for us in our industry, there's been, and I know this is way more immediate than what we're talking about now, but for the next 2 months, virtually all of our vendors have cut their bills 50% to support us in software, all these other things. And so I don't expect that kind of concession, but for a lot of the contracts, even though we have contracts and even though we have agreements, maybe it would look good again to the city and to our community and just be fiscally responsible to ask the question. I know we agreed to this, but we're in an unprecedented, a global pandemic. Is there any way that you all can help us out by cutting 10% of your bill for a certain period of time that we're paying? Something along those lines.
Mr. Long? Yes, Mr. Pettis, Commissioner Pettis and I did talk about that. You mentioned the county was looking at that. We have very few vendors, but we have talked about going out to them and seeing what they could provide. Our vendors are like Esri, Harris Govern, which are throughout the country. So I'm not sure what they're doing. They haven't come to us with any, hey, we're going to work with you and lower your amount. But it is something that we talked about here, and we're going to be looking at what few vendors we do have to see what we can shave off.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and I did tell Ms. Kilgore. I mean, every little bit helps. You know, we have an investment advisory firm. You know, that we just retained, but we called them up. The contract I think was under $200,000, and they shaved off $40,000 off of the life of the contract. And you know, for our point of view, you know, that's a position you know that can be retained, and so certainly every little bit helps.
Who do you use, Commissioner?
It's Hilltop Securities.
That was very nice of them.
Yeah. And so we're actually going through all 50 the top vendors to seeing if we can renegotiate any terms.
That is awesome.
Was there a look from my perspective? I just wanted to put it out there. Look, you know, I've you know, just as I am here on the Central Appraisal District Board, I am at the county. You know, I warn about, you know, increasing the budget, you know, rapidly. But I do tell them whatever ultimately the board, the county commissioners court decides when it comes to pay, even if I may disagree with it, I say that does trickle down to things like Central Appraisal District, and it's only fair that if that's ultimately what the county decided, then that same that should be applied to the Central Appraisal District. But this year, you know, as Mr. Hargrove said, you know, we've already cut $8 million with today's action, and then we're looking, I think, at a 5 to 6% cut next year. But whatever ultimately the county decides, that, you know, it's difficult because again this budget comes first, but it's what I've applied, I think, in the following year. But that's the situation at least that we're facing when it comes to our budget. So I would just take a look at that, you know, as when it comes to personnel, it's always, you know, the largest operating costs, you know, when it comes to any organization, you know, and perhaps reducing some of those increases. Just my point of view. I don't know, you know, I'm sure other members feel differently, but as Ms. Earl said, I think as options are brought to us for consideration, you know, that should definitely be one to be considered.
When will we meet again?
I don't have my calendar. What I'm recommending is in 2 weeks, Commissioner Pettis and Mr. Khalil and Mr. Miller, we can't conference call, you know, get together, get these options to them, have them review it, and then whatever other suggestions or changes, or just have them look at the options and say that's kind of what we're looking at, and then send them to you guys, and you've got it for 2 weeks. Our May meeting for the approval, and again, we could still make changes in May, is May 21st.
And we can also call, I mean, if you all are open to it, you know, we can call a special meeting, you know, if necessary, to give us more than that one opportunity in May to make adjustments. Whatever the board is willing to do, you know, we can schedule that. I know we didn't have an April meeting, but because usually this budget, so under the normal timeline, I think we would have had this meeting in April, correct, Ms. Kilgore? And
well, the meeting we're having right now at the end of April, we would have had 2 weeks ago.
I'm sorry. Right, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
so we would have been on a little bit of a different schedule.
Yeah.
but I'll, it's however the board wants to proceed.
And we can get, let's see, today's the 23rd. I think by the 7th, around that date, Commissioner Pettis, we could have numbers to you and Mr. Miller and Mr. Avalos. And then we could do a conference call, and then we could send those numbers right away to the rest of the board members. And we could always do another conference call. We're going to open up the building on the 18th. I believe the county judge and the mayor of El Paso has stated that everything is still being closed till the 17th. Stay at home, stay in place. So we'll be opening the building on the 18th. So we'll be able to have a real meeting on the 21st for anybody who wants to come into the boardroom, or we can do by same thing, the Skype here for those that don't want to come in. But we'll get information to everybody in 2 weeks. Give us a chance to work up at least 3 different options, going by what all y'all have been discussing right now. I've got Rosa here and David Stone and Rick and Albert and Jimmy, and so we'll all put our heads together and make some changes and have those options for you.
And Dinah, if you could, if you want me to do it, or if you want to reach out, with Mr. Avalos to see if he still wants to be part of the subcommittee meeting, since he's not part of this meeting.
Sure.
Just so the board knows, I wanted to give 2 new board members the opportunity to be on the subcommittee, and so I chose one from a municipality and one from a school district. That was for that. So Mr. Miller is a part of it, and Mr. Avalos is a part of it. But if if he's not here for this important meeting, let me know. I can swap him out with one of the other board members.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Trimble. I'd be glad to.
From the board.
Yeah, this is Trimble. A special meeting, I think, this is a time when that might make the most sense, Vince. And also, I'd be happy to be a part of, or really almost include the entire board, in that process as far as the subcommittee.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mr. Trimble. I think that's a very good idea that we just did, because it's not like we had to leave home or anything, that we all, if we can, gather together again as a committee of the whole,
Yeah. We can
and it can be another workshop.
Yeah, we can do an extenuating workshop, because this is where we get our information from the board. This is y'all's main function to help us with the budget and doing what we need to do to continue the work for the entities for the upcoming year. So what we can do, if this is the board and Commissioner Pettis, is on the 7th, or 2 weeks, we'll come up. Instead of having just a committee, we can have the whole board and do another meeting like this.
But ahead of time, Commissioner Pettis and Ms. Kilgore, I'd like to get all the information ahead of time personally, so that we've got time to chew on it a little while.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
I agree, and also Commissioner Pettis, that was fantastic having the representatives from the largest entities kind of just give a quick overview. And things are so fluid right now and moving so quickly. I don't know that wouldn't be a bad thing to do again in 2 weeks.
Okay, not really appropriate, again, given the circumstances that we find ourselves in. This is rapidly changing. I actually just got a message that I guess now they're mandating the use of face masks. So in case if you all didn't know that. But
thank you.
No, I think they're going to have a special meeting, for budgetary purposes. This is certainly the circumstance. And so if you all are willing, then Dinah, then let's, once you make the adjustments to the budget, we can do that.
And here's one thing, Commissioner Pettis, it could be a workshop, so you don't have to have quorum because it's just discussion. We won't make any decisions or any votes. It'll just be a discussion on what the options we're giving you. So if not everybody can sign in, we'll make sure everybody gets the information. The vote will be at the May meeting. The May 21st meeting is when the actual vote for the budget is.
Perfect.
Okay. Yeah, we'll
That
make
sounds
sure
great for me.
We'll work on the numbers right now. And I just checked with my IT staff, and they said yes, they're available to put us all together again in about a week and a half, 2 weeks, whenever we get all the information out there.
Commissioner Pettis,
Yes, sir.
this is Walter Miller. Ms. Kilgore, can we also kind of investigate another meeting format? Seems like a lot of people had issues with Skype. I generally use Skype in our business setting, but nobody could get on. So there's a lot of other platforms that we could look at. So,
Yeah,
I think it's better if we can actually look at see faces.
Yeah, because I just got booted off again for a third time. If I don't know if Cisco WebEx or some other platform would be more appropriate. I think it is better to.
I understand that this is a workshop, but we are really, even with the governor's edict, we're really not meeting the Open Meetings Act very well here. So with the inconsistency in the communication.
I know. There's also Microsoft Teams. That's what we use it for our formal commissioners court meetings, but we found that to be very effective. Okay, so I'll lay it out again. Do you all want to give parameters, or do you want to just take a look at the budget as Ms. Kilgore? Do you have heard the first opportunity to do that, and then make a determination then?
This is Catherine. I understood, and maybe I understood incorrectly, but I understood that they're going to do a review the budget, provide some options, and then send that out to the board prior to our next the special meeting, where we can have some time to review it individually and then have a discussion in our next meeting.
And that was my understanding as well.
Okay.
Likewise.
Super.
But the budget can still be amended regardless of what values put in there, right?
I'm perfect with that.
Okay. So I'm sorry, it broke up a little bit, but did you say the 5th is when we're preliminarily looking at a special meeting? Okay, and how does that, if I don't know if folks have access to their calendars right now, just preliminarily, does that look okay?
What is that, a Monday or Tuesday?
It's a Tuesday.
That sounds good.
I don't know why not for me.
I think it's a good way to celebrate Cinco de Mayo.
Oh my gosh. That's really good.
Since it's
No drinking until after the meeting.
Oh.
Yeah, I'd rather not have the cameras on that time.
You can have a
It just be the phone,
You
okay?
can do a virtual Cinco de Mayo after the meeting.
Yeah, that makes
Okay.
sense.
That was good.
Okay.
Okay, board
Well-
members, I think I've got direction. We'll put 3 options based on all the information and all the discussion, and then we'll get that out to everybody by the end of next week. And then on the 5th, we'll set everything up so we can talk to everybody again and go from there.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Okay.
I appreciate it. And I really appreciate all the board members for your participation. Please review the budget. And, it is important, like I said, particularly under these circumstances. But I really appreciate you all joining via video teleconference and please stay safe. I hope you and your family are healthy. Okay.
Yes, everybody stay safe. 6 feet apart.
All right.
Bye,
Thank
y'all.
you very
It was
much.
great talking to you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Take care. All right.
Bye.